Is that what it is? $15.
Chapter 16. Samuel anoints David as king. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king of Israel, so fill your flask with olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse who lives there, for I have selected one of his sons to be my king." But Samuel asked, "How can I do that? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." "Take a heifer with you," the Lord replied, "and say that you have come to make a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you which of his..."
I can't even freaking concentrate. If it reads, this freaking crazy weather in this dumb town.
Chapter 17. Goliath challenges the Israelites. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Soko in Judah and Azekah at Ephes-dammim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills, with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor-bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Jesse sends David to Saul's camp. Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimei, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 oldest brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champions strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day, Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers. And give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along and bring back a report on how they are doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelite army at the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts, as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left his things with the keeper of supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen the giant?" the men asked. "He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes." David asked the soldiers standing nearby, "What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" And these men gave David the same reply. They said, "Yes, that is the reward for killing him." But when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. "What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle." "What have I done now?" David replied. "I was only asking a question." He walked over to some others and asked them the same thing and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. David kills Goliath. "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. "I'll go fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." But David persisted. "I have been taking care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." Saul finally consented. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't go in these," he protested to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked out toward David with his shield-bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. "Am I a dog," he roared at David, "that you come at me with a stick?" And he cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals," Goliath yelled. David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. Israel routs the Philistines. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road, from Shaaraim as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took the Philistine's head to Jerusalem, but he stored the man's armor in his own tent. As Saul watched David go out to fight the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of his army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" "I really don't know," Abner declared. "Well, find out who he is," the king told him. As soon as David returned from killing Goliath, Abner brought him to Saul with the Philistine's head still in his hand. "Tell me about your father, young man," Saul said. And David replied, "His name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem."
Oh, that's the right one. I was supposed to go to the other one. What the heck? First, the Yirmiyahu chapter recounts a well-known story of David and Goliath, highlighting the power of faith, courage, reliance on God in the face of overwhelming odds. In this chapter, the Israelites faced the Philistines in battle with the giant warrior Goliath as their champion. Goliath taunted and challenged the Israelite army, instilling fear and intimidation among them. David and a young shepherd boy stepped forward to face Goliath, trusting in God's strength and deliverance. 1 Samuel 17 teaches us several important lessons. Faith in God's power. David's unwavering faith in God's power and deliverance enabled him to face the seemingly insurmountable challenge of Goliath. It kind of makes me realize I trust God when you brought me in this weird freaking town and there's nothing here in this freaking town. There's freaking nosy people causing problems, worrying about other people's affairs. Like, I don't freaking like it here. So I want to understand that. Seemingly inspiring challenges of Goliath interfaces that when we place our trust in God's strength rather than relying on our own abilities, we can overcome any obstacle that stands in our way. Courage in the face of fear. Despite the fear and limitation experienced by the Israelite army, David demonstrated incredible courage by stepping forward to confront Goliath. Teaches us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but rather than the willingness to face our fears with faith and reliance on God. God's deliverance and victory. The story of David and Goliath showcased God's faithfulness in delivering his people and granting them victory. It reminds us that when we trust in God to align ourselves with his purposes, we will fight for us. He will fight for us and bring about triumph even in the most challenging circumstances. First Samuel 17, trusting God's power. When facing daunting challenges or seemingly impossible situations, place your trust in God. Yeah, that's difficult. Powerful in the faithfulness. And remember that he is greater than any obstacle or enemy you may encounter. Seek his guidance and strength, knowing that he is able to provide the victory you need. Cultivate courage. Drew up courage by relying on God's presence and promises. Refuse to be paralyzed by fear, but instead step forward with faith, knowing that God is with you. Spending time in prayer and meditate on his word to strengthen your faith and courage. Celebrate God's faithfulness. Take time to reflect on and celebrate the ways God has delivered you in the past. Remember his faithfulness and provisioning in your life. This will serve as a reminder of his power and encouragement as you face future challenges. 1 Samuel 17 teaches us the power of faith, courage, and reliance on God in the face of overwhelming odds. We can practically apply these lessons by trusting in God's power, cultivating courage through reliance on him, and celebrating his faithfulness in our lives. May we be like David, facing our giants with unwavering faith and confidence in God's deliverance and victory.
Chapter 18. Saul becomes jealous of David. After David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of war, an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officers alike. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. They sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. What's this? He said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. David was playing the harp as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand, and he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David escaped him twice. Saul was then afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from Saul. Finally, Saul sent him away and appointed him commander over 1,000 men, and David faithfully led his troops into battle. David continued to succeed in everything he did, for the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops into battle. David marries Saul's daughter. One day Saul said to David, I am ready to give you my older daughter, Merab, as your wife. But first you must prove yourself to be a real warrior by fighting the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, I'll send him out against the Philistines and let them kill him rather than doing it myself. Who am I and what is my family in Israel that I should be the king's son-in-law? David exclaimed. My father's family is nothing. So when the time came for Saul to give his daughter Merab in marriage to David, he gave her instead to Adriel, a man from Meholah. In the meantime, Saul's daughter Michal had fallen in love with David, and Saul was delighted when he heard about it. Here's another chance to see him killed by the Philistines, Saul said to himself. But to David he said, Today you have a second chance to become my son-in-law. Then Saul told his men to say to David, The king really likes you, and so do we. Why don't you accept the king's offer and become his son-in-law? When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, How can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price for the daughter of a king? When Saul's men reported this back to the king, he told them, Tell David that all I want for the bride price is 100 Philistine foreskins. Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want. But what Saul had in mind was that David would be killed in the fight. David was delighted to accept the offer. Before the time limit expired, he and his men went out and killed 200 Philistines. Then David fulfilled the king's requirement by presenting all their foreskins to him. So Saul gave his daughter Michal to David to be his wife. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him, Saul became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Every time the commanders of the Philistines attacked, David was more successful against them than all the rest of Saul's officers. So David's name became very famous. Chapter 19. Saul tries to kill.
I'm gonna check this laundry. And I'm back. Where am I? I just read it. 16, 17, 18. That was 18. I think that was 18. Just can't remember anything, y'all. 17 is 18, so for Samuel 18. First Samuel 18 recounts the relationship between David and Saul, highlighting themes of jealousy, friendship, and God's divine plan. After David's victory over Goliath, he gained favor and recognition among the people of Israel. Saul, the current king actively welcomed David into his service, but as David's popularity grew, Saul's jealousy and insecurity began to take hold. 1 Samuel 18 teaches us several important lessons dealing with jealousy. Saul's jealousy towards David serves as a cautionary tale about the destructive nature of jealousy. It can lead to bitterness, resentment, and even harm towards others. It reminds us to guard our hearts against jealousy and instead of rejoicing in the success and blessings of others. The power of friendship. Despite Saul's jealousy, David formed a deep friendship with Saul's son, Jonathan. Their friendship was rooted in mutual respect, loyalty, and support, and demonstrates the importance of cultivating healthy and supportive relationships even in difficult circumstances. God's divine plan. Throughout the chapter, we see that God's hand was upon David, guiding and protecting him despite Saul's attempts to harm David. God's preserve him and continue to bless him. It reminds us that God's plan and purposes will prevail even in the face of adversity. 1 Samuel chapter 18, application apply. Guard against jealousy. Examine your heart and guard against feelings of jealousy towards others. Instead, choose to celebrate their successes and blessings. Cultivate an attitude of gratitude and contentment, recognizing that God has a unique plan for each individual. Cultivate healthy friendships. Invest in cultivating healthy and supportive friendships. Surround yourself with people that's positive, who can encourage and uplift you, and be a friend who offers support and loyalty, and build relationships based on mutual respect and love for one another. Trust in God's plan, even in difficult circumstances. Trust in God's plan, even timing. Remember that He is in control and will work out His purposes in your life. And seek His guidance and direction, knowing that He will protect and guide you through any challenges you may face. 1 Samuel 18 teaches us about the dangers of jealousy, the power of friendship, and the assurance of God's divine plan. We can practically apply these lessons by guarding against jealousy, cultivating healthy friendships, and trusting in God's plan for our lives. May we strive to be supportive, and loving towards others while trusting in God's faithful guidance and protection.
Chapter 19. Saul tries to kill David. Saul now urged his servants and his son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his strong affection for David, told him what his father was planning. "Tomorrow morning," he warned him, "you must find a hiding place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out." The next morning, Jonathan spoke with his father about David, saying many good things about him. "The king must not sin against his servant David," Jonathan said. "He's never done anything to harm you. He has always helped you in any way he could. Have you forgotten about the time he risked his life to kill a Philistine giant, and how the Lord brought a great victory to all Israel as a result? You were certainly happy about it then. Why should you murder an innocent man like David? There's no reason for it at all." So Saul listened to Jonathan and vowed, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed." Afterward, Jonathan called David and told him what had happened. Then he brought David to Saul, and David served in the court as before. War broke out again after that, and David led his troops against the Philistines. He attacked them with such fury that they all ran away. But one day when Saul was sitting at home with spear in hand, the tormenting spirit from the Lord suddenly came upon him again. As David played his harp, Saul hurled his spear at David, but David dodged out of the way, and leaving the spear stuck in the wall, he fled and escaped into the night. Michal saves David's life. Then Saul sent troops to watch David's house. They were told to kill David when he came out the next morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't escape tonight, you will be dead by morning." So she helped him climb out through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then she took an idol and put it in his bed, covered it with blankets, and put a cushion of goat's hair at its head. When the troops came to arrest David, she told them he was sick and couldn't get out of bed. But Saul sent the troops back to get David. He ordered, "Bring him to me in his bed so I can kill him." But when they came to carry David out, they discovered that it was only an idol in the bed with a cushion of goat's hair at its head. "Why have you betrayed me like this and let my enemy escape?" Saul demanded of Michal. "I had to," Michal replied. "He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him." So David escaped and went to Ramah to see Samuel, and he told him all that Saul had done to him. Then Samuel took David with him to live in Naioth. When the report reached Saul that David was at Naioth in Ramah, he sent troops to capture him. But when they arrived and saw Samuel leading a group of prophets who were prophesying, the Spirit of God came upon Saul's men, and they also began to prophesy. When Saul heard what had happened, he sent other troops, but they too prophesied. The same thing happened a third time. Finally, Saul himself went to Ramah and arrived at the great well in Siku. "Where are Samuel and David?" he demanded. "They are at Naioth in Ramah," someone told him. But on the way to Naioth in Ramah, the Spirit of God came even upon Saul, and he too began to prophesy all the way to Naioth. He tore off his clothes and lay naked on the ground all day and all night, prophesying in the presence of Samuel. The people who were watching exclaimed, "What? Is even Saul a prophet?"
So that's after chapter 19. First thing about chapter 19 continues the narrative of David's relationship with Saul, highlighting the themes of persecution and loyalty and divine protection. In this chapter, Saul's jealousy and fear of David's intensity leading him to make repeated attempts to kill David. David's wife Micah helps him escape from Saul's grasp, and David seeks refuge with the prophet Samuel. 1 Samuel 19 teaches us several important lessons. Number 1, persecution for righteousness' sake. David, despite being anointed as the future king and serving Saul, faithfully faces persecution from Saul due to jealousy and fear. It reminds us that sometimes, even when we are doing what is right and pleasing to God, we may face opposition and persecution from others. Number 2, loyalty and support. Throughout this chapter, we see the loyalty and support of key individuals in David's life, such as Jonathan and Micah. Their actions demonstrate the importance of standing by someone in times of trouble and providing support and protection when needed. Number 3, divine protection. Despite Saul's relentless pursuit of David, God assures David's safety and protection. It highlights God's faithfulness in guarding and preserving his chosen ones, even in the face of danger and adversity. Preserving righteousness when facing opposition or persecution when doing what is right, and continuing to walk in righteousness and trust in God's guidance seeks the strength from him to preserve in face of adversity, all the nonsense that's going on around you and people assuming things, trying to be nosy. Knowing that he sees your heart and will protect you and will not hate you. Be a loyal friend. Show loyalty, support, and protection to those around you, especially when they face difficulties or persecution. Be willing to stand up for them and provide a safe haven or assistance when needed. Let your actions demonstrate the love and loyalty of Christ. And trust in God's protection. Remember that God is your ultimate protector, and trust in his faithfulness and divine intervention during challenging times, and seek his guidance and rely on his strength, knowing that he will watch over you and provide a way of escape when necessary. 1 Samuel chapter 19 teaches us about facing persecution for righteousness' sake, the importance of loyalty and support, and God's divine protection. We can practically apply these lessons by persevering in righteousness, being loyal friends to those in need, and trusting in God's unfailing protection. May we find comfort in knowing that God is our ultimate protector and refuge in times of trouble.